There are 4 terms in the title of my Louis Vance lecture in systematic theology that require some preliminary clarifications to determine its scope and methodology. First, ecclesiology. By ecclesiology is meant a treatise in systematic theology that investigates from the faith perspective the church, as in the words of Lumen Gentium, Vatican II dogmatic constitution of the church, I quote, a sacrament, that is, a sign and instrument of communion with God and the unity of humankind. So the kind of investigation we do in systematic theology on the church as a sacrament, that is, a sign and instrument of the communion with God, and as communion humanity, we call it ecclesiology. The second term is the term doing ecclesiology. So it's not only ecclesiology, but doing ecclesiology. Now, in contrast to the church as a cosmic mystery in which God, Father, Son, and Spirit is present in history, from the beginning of creation to the end of time as a communion, a loving communion of grace, doing ecclesiology is a human act, an ever inadequate act of understanding the mystery we call the church. It is an act of fides quaerens intellectum, faith in search of understanding, to use the famous words of St. Anselm of Canterbury. Now, as a theological exercise, apart from some anticipations in the writings of John of Viterbo at the beginning of the 14th century, of John de Raguna and John de Torquemada in the 15th century, doing ecclesiology emerged only during the 16th century after Reformation between Catholic and Protestants. And the major issue at that time was, what is a true religion? De vera religione. What is a true church? De vera ecclesia. So that was the issue that provoked the theological reflections on the church. So in a way, ecclesiology is a very recent treatise. It's not an old treatise. Nobody wonder or worry about the church. They live it, you see. They discuss about Trinity, Nicaea II, 325. They discuss about Jesus, right? But they never discuss about what is the church. They just simply for granted the church is what we do, we live, and so forth. Now, at Vatican I, 1869, 1870, there was some discussion about the church, but the council was interrupted by the Franco-Prussian War. And so, instead of a full-fledged reflection of the church, we have the two dogma, papal primacy and papal infallibility. And if you study only Vatican II, you get a very lopsided view of what the church is. Look like everything is reduced to the papacy. Right? With Vatican II, 1965 to 1962 to 1965, for the first time in the church, there was an extensive, detailed examination of the church in itself at intra, and in its relation to the world at extra. So that was the beginning of reflections on what the church is, the nature of the church, and what the church does, the ministry of the church. And in the 50 years after the council, there has been a veritable avalanche or tsunami, because we lay down and talk about tsunami, of writings on ecclesiology, that if anyone, any professor of yours, claim that he or she has read everything that has been written on the church in the last 50 years, that is fake news. The third, world Christianity. So ecclesiology, doing ecclesiology, and world church. I hope you have heard of this neologism, world church. World church is a buzzword that used in recent history of the Church of Christianity to convey the idea that despite the fact that at least since the 16th century, Christian missions were carried by and from the West to the rest, Christianity, which originated in the Middle East, not West, never was, has never been, and never will be a Western religion. So by world Christianity, we mean that Christianity is polycentric. That's the two Greek words for you. Poly means many, and center. So the church doesn't have one center. The church has always had many centers, polycentric. And what characterizes the church is pluralism, diversity, multiplicity, not unanimity. As a result of the earliest missionary efforts of the church, the early church, which was not directed not only towards the West, the Roman Empire, right, with Paul, but we have to remember that the earliest missionary efforts of the church were directed to what we call the East, namely the Persian, the Indian, and the Chinese empires. So there was not just one empire, the Roman Empire. There were four empires colluding, fighting with each other: Roman, Persian, Indian, and Chinese. The earliest efforts of missionaries were not towards simply the West. It was always to Syria, Mesopotamia, Iran, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and finally China. That was what we call the Silk Road. That was trade. So very often we always say, well, you know, the first apostle, Paul, Peter, the earliest expansion of the church was not done by the apostles. That is fake news. We only knew about Peter, about the first 7, 8 chapters of Acts. Afterwards, we do not know what happened to the fellow. The other apostles, maybe Thomas went to India. That's the story. Who are the rest? I presume they went back to their wives, their family. We never heard of them, you see. So the idea somehow the church was brought and expanded by apostles was pure propaganda. How was the church spread? Who spread the church? Syria, Iraq, Iran, Mesopotamia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and China. Who are they? They are the men and the women merchants. They work along the road. They were business people. They just travel. And they were Christians. And everywhere they go, they found a church. Bishop, priest wasn't there. They stayed back in their comfortable monastery. It was these trade people that went along, and everywhere they found a church. That was what I call the gossiping of the gospel. That's how it was spread. That's how it was spread. And everywhere they went, they found churches. And so the church is polycentric. It has so many centers. Not only Rome. You have Baghdad, the center of early Christianity. The cradle of early Christianity is not Rome. Sorry to disappoint you. It's Baghdad. That should wake us up, right? Fourth, the notion of migration. In addition to globalization, worldwide migration is posing enormous challenges in economic, socio-political, and cultural arenas of countries of origination, transit, and destination. But also, as we all know, migration has changed, a tremendous change has brought about tremendous change in the face of the religious and particularly Christian religious tradition of all countries. And the greatest example is the United States. And so, it is migration today. If you want to do the ecclesiology, you have to do it from below, from the data that you live, the people that live in the society. And what characterizes today is the flow of migration. And so that if we want to do a systematic theology of the church, and without taking into account what world Christianity and what migration have done to Christianity, we are doing a ecclesiology that interests no one. Now, taking into account all these four ideas, I would like to propose three basic theses. So I put them together, here I come up with. The first thesis is this. If we want to do theology of the church today, we have to do it from below. From the concrete economic, social-political, cultural, and religious factors or realities facing the church today. We can do theology from the Bible, we can do the church from patristic here, but if you want to do a church that is relevant, that has something to say to the people today, that can transform the church as an institution, we have to begin from the reality of migration. That is a big thesis, first one. The second thesis I would like to do is this. Migration is not an adventitious, something that happened by chance to the church. Rather, I will show tonight, I hope to show, that migration belongs to the very essence of the church. Without migration, there is no church at all. Therefore, migration, I would say on Sunday, I believe in one holy, Catholic, apostolic, and migrant church. That is, migration belongs to the very core of what it means to be church, and I will do that eventually. Lastly, in my third, I would try to explore, to delineate a migration ecclesiology. That is, I try to reflect on the church as an institutional migrant. So those are the three things I like to do tonight. First point. I like to use world Christianity and migration as loci theology, that is, as a sources for doing theology. Now, world Christianity, the term world Christianity, was used the first time in 1929 in a book called Human Needs and World Christianity by a Protestant Francis John McConnell, 1929. And then on, the expression became very common in the circle, mostly Protestant, not Catholic, Protestant historian, theologians. And what were the ideas that they want to explore? Two ideas, the idea of mission. For them, world Christianity is the Christianity that is directed outward, directed to mission, enter into all the lands where the gospel is not yet known. So missionary effort was the first key idea that all these guys talks about. In 1910 in Edinburgh, there was a world missionary meeting, assembly. And in 1910, the concern of the Protestant that meet in Edinburgh, Scotland, was how to evangelize the world in their generation. And that's where the topic about world Christianity. The second concern is about church unity. Because the church was so divided, especially in mission fields. You have Baptists one way, and then you have the Methodists, you have the Lutheran, and you have all kinds, Calvinist, Presbyterian, fighting for each other, stealing each other's sheep. Right? And they say, no, we can't do that. If you want to do mission well, we have church unity. And so at Edinburgh, 1910, again, the second concern was about ecumenical unity. Okay? So those are two meanings that when people in the beginning of the 20th century, when they use the term world Christianity, that's what they meant. We want to do missions, and we want to be united as one church throughout the world. In the 1970s around, about that time, church historians begin to study the way in which Christian and Christianity are rooted in different countries, Japan, China, India, or Latin America, Africa. They come to realize that there is not one church. There is not one form of Christianity, but many Christianities. Several years ago, I wrote a book called Christianities in Asia, published by in England. The editor wrote to me, said, there is a wrong spelling in the title. Wiley Press, wrong title. I said, what do you mean? You say Christianities in Asia. There's no such a thing in English. I said, there's now. They want to change to Christianity. I said, that's exactly what I want to avoid. I want to convey that even in Asia, there are Christianities. Not one, many. And they say, well, you know, we printed the advertising, the cover is done. I said, well, then don't publish it. Oh, no, we publish it. It's one of the most making money they ever published. Christianities in Asia. So what does it mean? Why do worry about the plural? Why not Christianity, but Christianities? I'd like to propose 3 consequences for thinking about the church as Christianities in the plural. First, we recognize that all local forms of Christianities as forms of the Christian faith, however limited and partial they may be. We recognize Christianity in China, in Guatemala, in San Antonio, diverse, but all of them have something to say about being Christian. And therefore, I, in San Antonio, must learn from Guatemala, and Guatemala must learn from Beijing, Beijing must learn from Rome. All are forms of Christianity, that local form, indigenized form, be it in Nairobi or anywhere in Africa, you may look strange to you, but it's a form of Christianity that we need to recognize and to learn from. Second, more important. Because of Christianity, it rules out the use of any of them as the benchmark of Christianity. Christianity in Rome is one form of Christianity. It cannot be used as a benchmark to say everyone in Asia must be like Rome. Right? It cannot be a norm for every other church to imitate. Third, it enables the revitalization of Christianity through the interaction among the diverse forms of local Christianities. So once you recognize that every form of Christianity is legitimate, it has something to teach me, and therefore I cannot make my form of Christianity the norm of all the forms of Christianity, we begin at moments of dialogue, mutual teaching, and mutual learning. This is what being a Christian today in the 21st century means. No one form of Christianity can claim the normative form for all the rest. Okay. Second, migration. We are now in the age of migration. It's a title of an excellent book. It's rather expensive, $40, right? But it's worth buying. So give up 3 hamburgers and you get this book, right? The Age of Migration is written by 3-4 authors. I will not bother you with all the statistics I put in here. I am told that this will be published later and you can have it. But what characterizes today is the enormous proportion of people who are what we call on the move. I'll just give an example, just one number. In 2013, there were 232 million people, that is 3.2% of the world population, who live outside of their native countries. In a sense, they are migrant, one form or another. And you put all the migrants together, 232 million, they exceed the number of most populations of most countries. Now, we live in the United States, and I will not touch on this point because it's politically sensitive. I am not here to do politics. But we cannot live in the United States today without hearing every day attacks against migrants. And so when we look at our time, our world, the global scene in which there are so many migrants, and we today limit 50,000 migrants into the United States. What a joke, and above, what a tragedy. I was at Princeton University last week, and there was a professor of sociology. Her name is Saskia Sassin, S-A-S-S-E-N. And she gave a lecture on migration. She's world expert migration. And she said that today, besides all the migration happening in the world, there are 3 flows of migration. First, unaccompanied minors from Central America, the so-called DACA in the country. They came without parents, and they live here, they grow up here. This is a huge problem. The first time ever. Before, they all come with a family. Now they came by themselves, children. And then I stop at the border, and they say, oh yeah, if you are children, you can come in because United States love children. And then here they block, and then or they come in and get deported. Second, these days, is the expulsion of the Rohingyas from Myanmar. Every day, 50,000 Rohingya cross into Bangladesh. And they are the minority Muslims who live there for hundreds of years. But because they want to grab their land, they expel them on the ground that they are Muslim, because Myanmar is a Buddhist country. They try to use religion to hide the fact that the real reason is economic, land grabbing. And the third are the people from the Middle East. We know in Europe, Pope Francis came and visited Lampedusa, the people from Syria and you know which are the two countries that welcome them the most? Turkey and Greece. Those are the two. They're overwhelmed with the number of these people come in. All right. So if you do ecclesiology and you don't look at these two things, how can you claim that you're doing theology of the church? And that's what we live in that ivory tower. Unless we look at these realities that happen in the church, world Christianity, happen around the church, migration, and think theologically. And so the question is, how do we respond to this? As Pope Francis has done for us, I show every day you go on the internet, Pope Francis always says something about migrants, how we have to welcome them and so forth. But as theologians, as people who do study at Oblate School of Theology, how do we do this? In my judgment, the polycentricity of world Christianity and the age of migration constitute the two most burning and intractable issues for contemporary Christianity and therefore for contemporary ecclesiology. There is no doubt that global migration brings with it innumerable and enormous challenges to countries of origination, transit, and destination. In addition, because migration exacerbates the diversity and multiplicity of world Christianity, it also poses no less complex and hitherto unimaginable problems to the church, especially in terms of ministry to the newcomers. To be concrete, I ask you these questions. How can an American parish make these strangers into its full-fledged members with equal rights and responsibilities in terms of inclusive hospitality, pastoral outreach, multilingual liturgy, culturally appropriate sacramental celebrations, religious education, popular devotions, and ethnic celebrations? These are the questions we face today, every day in the parish. So, I move to the second part. I'd like to show you my first thesis, the Church of Migrant and the Migrant Church. What do I mean? I want to say here, very simple. Outside the church, outside migration, there is no American Catholic Church. Period. That is a definitive historical statement. Outside of migration, without migration, there is no American Catholic Church. And I always love the Latin term because I'm talking to seminarians, and seminarians learn to learn formula so they can repeat the exams, all right? Extra migrationem nulla ecclesia americana. So that's one principle that you learn. Right? I don't need to go long on this because time, So I'd like to do simply. Look at the United States today, meaning the Catholic Church United States. Where did it come from? Not locally. Who are the people who came? In the 19th century, waves of Irish, Polish, Italians. Who else? Germans. French from Canada, Polish, I already mentioned. 19th century, without them, there's no church. And although they were not considered as, people, member of the society, they just went and built their churches. They were called the brick-mortar Catholics. They built neighborhoods, they built churches. That's 19th century. If there were no these people, there's no American Catholic Church. Of course, there were Mexican already in this country. We don't forget that. There are Native Americans already here, but the bulk of Catholics that came. Now, I want to give you one statistic only, just to wake you up. In 1820, there were 195,000 Catholics. In 1860, how many years is that? 60 years. The number came over 3 million. In 60 years, that's the number of Catholic increase in this country. It made the Catholic the largest denomination in the United States. What a shame to us today we limit only to 50,000 immigrants. 60 years, you are talking about 2 million increase. And now we worry about a few, 50, 60,000 people. In the middle of the 20th century, thanks to the Immigration and Nationality Act 1965, sponsored by Hart and Seller. 1965, Johnson signed the document allowing them to come. No more quota from Germany or everywhere. Here you open a new wave of Catholics coming in. Before it was Europe, and now Asia, Latin America, and Africa. Think for a moment. These people are Catholics, but their Catholicity, the way of being Catholic, is so different from the German and the Irish Catholicism. The German and Irish Catholicism is so bland. Vanilla type. Come the African, they dance, they don't. Come the Vietnamese, the Filipino, they sing, they dance. The Korean, they not only came as Catholic, they brought with them new form of being Catholic that renovate, that change the way American Catholic, Irish, and Germans live. What enrichment. Without them, what Catholic American culture is there? And then came the Latin American from the 1980s, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Central America. Remember all the Reagan thing, the war. Those who are gray hair here remember the sisters walking down there. The Marino were murdered, Mary, her sister, Maury, and so forth. They came, another form of Christianity. They are not Mexican. They are different kind. They knew Madonna, right? And you have Our Lady of Lord out there. But we have Our Lady of Guadalupe, much more powerful than Our Lady of Lourdes. And then the Vietnamese came. Also, we are Our Lady of Lavac, even more powerful than the Lady of There have been all kinds. Imagine the possibility of being Catholic in the United States in so many different ways. And that's what makes the Church United States, Catholic Church United States, so alive. Second, there's no church. I'm talking the first one, American Catholic Church. Now, the second thesis is much harder to prove, but I will try my best within the time. Allow me. I maintain that outside migration, there is no church, period. No church at all. How can I prove that? And so the Latin term is extra migrationem nulla ecclesia. No church at all. Now, for us to understand this, it's very difficult. Because when you look at, any one of you teach church history in the seminary? In older days, before 1980s? That's old time. Look at it. Open the book and see how the book is organized. New Testament, patristic age, medieval church, separation of Orthodox and Latin, Greek and Latin, 1054, 16th century, Reformation. Right? You follow me on that? And the book tells you that. And then you have a little bit mission in the 19th century, the papacy with Vatican I, papal infallibility, papal pride, and then Vatican II. That's the way how we taught church history. So, I ask you, any one of you who want to write a book on the history of Christianity or teach a course on church history, what are the events that you consider pivotal, epochal, epoch-making change? What are the events? Ecumenical councils? The struggle between the papacy and the emperor? The division between East and West, the Greek and Latin? The Reformation, we just celebrated 500-year anniversary of Luther, 1517. Why do we divide the church in this way? Why do we teach this kind of churchery in Africa? Why? What does Reformation have to do with Church Africa? It's a family quarrel in the 16th century. And now you imported that to Asia, to Latin America, to Africa. Why? Is it a founding of the Oblate of Immaculate Mary? It's important. Is it papal election? Pope Francis? Or is it the institution of Monsignors that changed the church? I would like to do a thought experiment tonight with you. Instead of taking council, popes, and all Reformation, let's take migration as the lens to understand what church is and how church develops. I have no time, so I propose 8 migratory flows that constitute the church as it is, not as some abstract dogmatic, as is on the ground. What are the first? The first one is migration of Christians out of Jerusalem, the year 70, when the second temple was destroyed. Without migration out of Jerusalem, you know what it is? Christianity would have remained just a Jewish sect. But because of migration, now Christianity expands to the world. That is the beginning of migration of the church. Yeah, you can talk about, the Holy Spirit, all that. That's dogmatic. I want to see when the church began to spread out, it was a migration of the first Christian out of Jerusalem. The second event, now out of Palestine. Out of Palestine. The Roman province of Syria. Think of the city of Antioch, Damascus. Damascus is where, for the first time, the followers of Jesus are called Christians. Edessa, East, Mesopotamia, Iraq, Greece and Asia Minor, today is Turkey, Western Mediterranean, Italy, France, Spain, and North Africa, Egypt, and Asia along the Silk Road, to Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and China. At the Council of Nicaea, 325, the bishop had to sign the name at the end of the document. There was one, big Hancock, John, Bishop of all India. That's why he signed himself, 325. Rome, it was still a very backward city, just like Texas. And all those cities, look, those are the cities. Alexandria, my God, it's the city of culture, university, libraries. And China, at the 7th century, at Tang Dynasty, the peak, the largest city in the world in the 7th century was Chang'an. And for some reason, church historians simply ignore them. And just, Paul went to Rome, Peter went to Rome, they died there, become martyrs there, and then they say now, what a theological picture of the church. Next, you have, I'll go up. Transfer of the imperial capital from Rome to Constantinople. Imagine the year 318, 20, something like that, Constantine is like, that's amazing. That migration of people from Rome to Turkey, to Alexandria, we call Byzantium, creates an entire new Christianity we call Byzantine Christianity. It's amazing, but people just haven't mentioned it. It's just this movement of people from all go to, then you have from there, after you go to Moscow, they come to be the third Rome, migration to northeastern Europe, you have a new face of the church as Greek, Middle Eastern, and Slavic church. Forget about the council. These are the people who live on it. Imagine how difficult it is if Pope Francis today, although he's a Jesuit, he loves so much the Oblate, and he say, I will move the church to San Antonio, Texas. I will move the Roman Curia to San Antonio, Texas. Imagine that. Imagine all the cardinals had to bring their wives, their children to Texas to look for their home, apartment, and all that kind of thing. It's no joke. You have to imagine really the whole people moved to a new city, which he named Constantinople, because his name is Constantine. He's a very humble guy, just like Donald Trump, right? Number 4, migration of German tribes, the Vandals, the Goths, and the Visigoths. We have a new face of the church of German tribes. And they went from there to go to France, Italy, Spain, to North Africa. Migrations, new churches, everywhere, different. The next one, Migration of Portuguese and the Spanish Christians into the New World in Asia in the 16th, 17th century. Imagine the new kind of Christianity, a new kind of world, a new kind of church. They would have died if they stayed in Europe. But now, by discovering the new world, actually, you have new Christianity. That's far more important than any papal elections, or any Monsignor made in Texas, right? The next one, from 1965 to World War I. Imagine the kind of colonialism that started. In the 16th, 17th century, it was Portugal, Spain, and then Holland. 18, Britain, and then the whole colony goes. And when they do like this, you know, those guys didn't go by themselves. They bring their wives, the Christianity, all to China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Latin Africa, and all that. That was. And then in World War II, there's a massive migration back to Europe. Again, bringing their wives, their children, their family. It's a brand new Christianity because of migrations. Different kind. And today, there's globalization. The church that make all of us global citizens. So tonight you're here, you hop on the plane, 24 hours, you're in Japan. They come here, then they stay, they study, they work, they go back. It's a crisscrossing of total people on the move. That's the new norm. The old now is to stay home. Today is people who live and go. And the war in the Middle East. What I am trying to say in very brief word is to say to this, that if you want to understand what church is today, and therefore to make ecclesiology, is to understand that it is the people on the move. That's the last part. With all that in mind, I'd like to propose a type of ecclesiology. It's a kind of constructive ecclesiology I'd like to. And I would like to begin with a Latin term, extra migrationem nulla ecclesia americana, extra ecclesiam nulla ecclesia. But this is much more controversial. Because you used to say, those of who are old enough to remember, outside the church there is no salvation. Extra ecclesiam nulla salus. But if you have followed, if you have accepted what I've been saying up to this point, you put three premises together: no migration, no church. No church, no salvation. Aristotelian logic would conclude, outside of migration, there is no salvation. Let that sink for the moment. Outside migration, there is no salvation, because outside migration, there is no church. And without church, there is no community of sacrament, sign and instrument of salvation. What I have to do is to read you within the time that I give you one text. I'd like you to read later on. Go to internet, check the letter of Ignatius. It is an anonymous letter wrote to this man somewhere in the 2nd or the 3rd century. And the text is a bit long, so bear with me because it's so rich, so beautiful written, because I would base my ecclesiology migration on them. Here it is. For Christians cannot be distinguished from the rest of human race by country or language or customs. They do not live in cities of their own. They do not use a peculiar form of speech. They do not follow an eccentric manner of life. This doctrine of theirs has not been discovered, but ingenuity of deep thought of inquisitive mind. Nor do they put forward a merely human teaching as some people do. What a wonderful statement from this guy. I don't know, man, woman, I don't know. Yet, although they live in Greek and barbarian cities alike, as each man's lot has been cast, and follow the customs of the country in clothing and food and other matters of daily living, at the same time, they gave proof of the remarkable and admittedly extraordinary constitution of their own commonwealth. They live in their own countries, but only as aliens. The Greek term is parokoi. They have a share in everything as citizens, Greek politai, and endure everything as foreigners, Greek xenoi, the Greek text I'm reading. Every foreign land is their fatherland, and yet for them, every fatherland is a foreign land. Amazing text, second century text. Think of this is what we are today as American Catholics. They marry like everyone else and they beget children, but they do not cast out their offspring. They share their board with each other, but not their marriage bed. It is true that they are in the flesh, but they do not live according to the flesh. They be themselves on earth, but their citizenship is in heaven. They obey the established laws, but in their own lives they go far beyond what the laws require. They love all people, but by all people they are persecuted. They are unknown, and still they are condemned. They are put to death, and yet they are brought to life. They are poor, and yet many are rich. They are completely destitute, but they enjoy complete abundance. They are dishonored, and in their very dishonor, they are glorified. They are defamed, and they are vindicated. They are reviled, and yet they bless. When they are affronted, they will pay due respect. When they do good, they are punished as evildoers. Undergoing punishment, they rejoice because they are brought to life. They are treated by the Jews as foreigners, and they are hunted down by the Greeks. And all the time, those who hate them find it impossible to justify the enmity. To put it simply, what the soul is in the body, that Christians are in the world. The soul is dispersed through all the members of the body, and Christians are scattered throughout all the world. The soul dwells in the body, but does not belong to the body. And Christians dwell in the world, but do not belong to the world. The soul, which is immortal, is housed in a mortal dwelling. Why Christians are settled among corruptible things, to wait for the incorruptibility that will be theirs in heaven. This is the most beautiful text. Please go to, it's available on internet. Check it and read it. And that's what I mean for us today to think of the church, is to think of the church as a people who live in the world on the move constantly. No fatherland is their fatherland, and yet every fatherland is their fatherland. I have little time, so I will move on to number 2, number 3, number 4, very short, and I conclude within the time. When the early Christian talks about migrants, they have in front of them 3 words to describe themselves. Okay? Sorry. And then here are the 3 words. the word stranger or alien, the word foreigner, and the word sojourner. Right. Now, in English, they all look like the same. We use them interchangeably. But in Greek, they are used very distinctly with different meaning. Who are the stranger? The stranger is one who does not belong to the house or community or nation in which she or he lives, and is often considered as an enemy. Okay, so that's what they call a stranger or an alien. In Greek, xenos, in Latin, hospice. The second, a foreigner, the next one, the foreigner, is one who belongs to another race. For example, non-Jews, they would call them a foreigner. And usually because they worship other gods, they're considered as evil, right? As no good. And therefore, Jews are forbidden to marry them or to have contact with them. The third category are the sojourner. Who are the sojourner? The sojourner, I'd like to say the Greek word for you, paroikos, sojourner. Now, if you speak Spanish, what is the word for parish? Parroquia, paroikos, parish, parishioner. Do you know when you hear, I am a parishioner? I belong to a parish. You say, I am a sojourner. It doesn't say membership. I am a sojourner. I am a migrant. So tomorrow, if you write an email to the Archbishop of San Antonio, you say, Dear Migrant in Chief. That's what he is. He is a sojourner in chief. He is a paroikos. He is a paroikos, a parishioner, a sojourner who doesn't have here. He doesn't have authority here. He's on the move. That's what we are, what we call ourselves. We are parishioners. Now, the good news is that in Jesus, those who were strangers or foreigners have become sojourners. And because we are sojourners, we are co-citizens, sympolitai, with the Jews, with people, the new kingdom. It's amazing theology of Christian existence. When you talk about the parish, you don't talk about territory. You don't talk about registration. You don't talk about, collection money. All good. I have nothing to do with it. But theologically, ecclesiologically, when you're talking about, you are a migrant. And that's what the church is. When Clement of Rome, the second Pope of Rome, wrote a letter to the church in Corinth towards the end of the first century, he writes this: I write to the church of God which sojourns in Corinth. The Greek term paroikousa, parish, parishioners. You are migrant in Rome. And to the church of God, he answered, but to the church of God which sojourns in Rome. So the Christians in Rome are sojourners. The Christians in Corinth are sojourners. They are parishioners. Polycarp, the bishop martyr of Smyrna, he wrote to the Christians of Philippi, go to the church of God which resides as a stranger In Greek, paroikouze at Philippi. Next time you write letters to the parishes, to the Christians who are migrants in San Antonio, that scared the shit out of them, right? And thus, it is important to remember this is what we are Christians, we are migrants. It's not something that happened to me 30, 40 years ago. It's constant who I am as a Christian. And so in the Eucharist, a friend of mine, Daniel Grudy, who is a Holy Cross prisoner, and is a great theologian, he talks about the Eucharist as a moment in which Christ, as the host, and at the same time a migrant. Remember, he was a migrant. He opened bread, he shared bread to us. Just as the migrant welcome them, they break bread to us, we bring it to them. Conclusion. Lastly, migrant ecclesiology is also a Christological ecclesiology. The theology of migration, as I read in letter to the Ignatius, focus on the migrant's life as imitatio Christi. After all, Jesus is the paradigmatic migrant who dwelt between the two borders of two worlds. Through the incarnation, ontologically, he stood between divinity and humanity and embraced both. Already as a child, he experienced migration in Egypt. As an adult, politically, he lived between colony and empire. He had no citizenship. Culturally, between Roman and barbarian. Linguistically, between Aramaic and Greek. He knew some Greek. Religiously, between the chosen people and the pagan, the Goyim. During his ministry, he was itinerant and homeless, having nowhere to lay his head, unlike foxes that have holes and birds have nests. As a migrant, Jesus was a marginal Jew, to use the title of John Mayer's famous book. His migration carried him all over the border, both geographical and conventional. Palestine and the pagan territories, Jews and non-Jews, men and women, the young and the old, the rich and the poor, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, the powerful and the weak, the wealthy and the sick, the clean and the unclean, the righteous and the sinners. Because of his multiple border crossings were a threat to those who occupy the territories, the economic, the political, and religious centers of power, he was hung on the cross between heaven and earth, between the two cosmic borders, a migrant until the very end. That's why he could truly say that whoever welcomes a migrant stranger, welcome him. We are now living in the age of migration, and more than ever, the church is called to be part of world Christianity. Theology, as an ecclesial-academic discipline, is challenged to interpret the signs of the time in the light of faith, and faith in the light of the sign of the time. One of the treatises in systematic theology is Ecclesiology, and I am deeply grateful that Louis Vance's lecture in systematic theology gave me the opportunity to answer twin questions of what the church is and what the church must do. There is no more opportune venue to do this than in San Antonio, at the Oblate School of Theology, where we are reminded daily of the struggles and the contributions of migrants to the church and society, and where the reality of world Christianity is visible everywhere.